Hello, I'm Soycat, and China's population just fell for the first time in the 21st century. This was the first decline in 60 years, and it was a decline in population of 850,000 people. That is more than the entire population of about a quarter of the world's countries that was lost from China in 2022. However, this represents less than a 0.1% fall. The reason that it's so tragic is, of course, the graph and what it represents for long-term trends. Over and over and over again, China's population trends have been getting worse and worse and worse, to the point where even a decently optimistic one still says they'll lose about half of their population in just the next half century or so alone. It is a very, very, very scary fact to have a 0.5% of your population losing every year, let alone a full percent, which will be happening in the next 40 years. So what is the deal with China? What does it really mean when you hear the words China's population is falling? I figured I would dive into it a little bit today because it does have implications for the rest of us. As you can probably see in France and countries around the world, we're always talking about retirement ages and population and what this means for the working age population and whatnot. So let's talk about it today. So first things first, yes, their population has fallen, but honestly, right now it is not a big deal. It is one of those interesting facts where, but before something bad happens, it gets slightly worse on the way, and it's only bad because it is a turning point. This is a historic point at which you can see China's insane population growth is starting to turn around. I mean, if you look at even just this simple Google map right here, you can see that, China and India had the same trajectory until China really got into the middle income countries, and at that point you can see that as people prioritized having children less, I think there was a whole policy against having children in China, maybe that maybe had something to do with it. Who would know for sure if only having one child when a replacement rate is 1.4 could reduce your population. But either way, you can see that, over the time that China has become very middle income, their population graph has stopped looking like India's, which is, again, to say skyrocketing, and instead started to look like the United States. The United States has steadily crept up in population from 180, they've doubled in the last 60 or so years, whereas China has done the same with a little bit more. And so this is not that bad of a thing. The US is a very stable country. It is the world's largest democracy, but also the world's largest economy. It's not a bad thing to be going after, especially when you look at China's gross domestic product and realize that's going up. There are lots of very good metrics for the country, but the big and really concerning one is actually counterintuitively their life expectancy. So the reason that this is so bad is because this is taking into account the fact that China's life expectancy has actually now officially surpassed that of the US. Admittedly, you have to use some, again, by different metrics, it's roughly the same, but the fact that in any metric you can say that a Chinese citizen born in a country with a lower income is going to do better off than a US citizen, which is the richest country in the world by salary, that is a concerning fact that it's a full year of difference by any measure, right? And so, you can see that for most of the US's history, they've steadily climbed up with a sharp decline over the last decade or so. Did anything happen in the last few years that would decrease life expectancy? Could you let me know in a 6-paragraph response down below? But you can see, what do you know, it references it right here. You can see that, obviously, there is a big difference in why this has happened. It's kind of as technicality of yes, the US had a bad year, China had a good year, but the fact is Chinese people are now living as long as their Western counterparts. Chinese people are having incomes which are getting closer to their Western counterparts, and the response to this seems to be a massive decrease in the Chinese birth rate. You can see this looking at a population graph all you like, but the biggest way to point this out is to look at a population pyramid where you can see what age of the population is in each particular age group here. So if you separate out from 0 to 100, you can see that most people don't live past 80 because that's the rough life expectancy. So we'll just ignore all these people right here and instead say between 0 and 80, which percent of the population are in which group. Because it's every 5-year gap, you'd expect in a perfect population there would be an equal amount of people in each group. Maybe it would get slightly smaller as people aged because the longer you live, the more likely you are to die. That's a fun fact they don't tell you. But you'd expect that it would get a smaller and smaller pyramid because it's meant to be a population pyramid, but instead, because of big booms, let's say, as people know, there are big birthing booms and big birthing contractions, a big bunch of babies were born 50 to 54 years ago, which was not matched 45 to 49 years ago. Then there was another big boom 30 to 40 years ago, which has not been matched ever since then, with the last 5 years having depressingly low births. Again, this 2.3% of the population should be closer to 4%, so there are now about, and also you can see it's very male heavy, but that's an interesting China-specific point regarding birthing policies and the culture regarding what happens when you have a daughter versus having a son. You know, there's a cultural point to that. We're going to ignore the birthing gender thing for now. It does result in some societal issues, but it's not the biggest one that China faces. The biggest one is that why aren't people having babies? In the last 5 years, there's been a huge, downtick, which was already a downtick from the last big boom they had, which was 30 years ago. And this, big decrease in the number of people having babies is not just a problem for, like, population numbers, because ultimately, you might say if you're someone out there, like, why do I care about my country's population? Having 1.4 billion people who are considering themselves to be the same as me sounds awesome, but what do I care if it's 700 million? If China loses half their population, as indeed they are predicted to do, but even if that happens, you can see that, like, well, they'll still be the second biggest country by population on Earth. The US is coming nowhere near them, and so ultimately, what does it actually matter to have a population decrease? What does it matter to have a bunch of babies not being born? Because I hate babies, I would love to have fewer of them in the world, but here's the problem: these aging groups right here who are currently working are soon going to retire. So, as you know, the way the world works is generally you get to retire at a certain point, and this causes a problem when a big batch of people retire but are not replaced. Every single year, people aged 15 to 19 or 20 to 24, depending on which way you see the world, people in these groups are entering the workforce at the same point that these people are leaving it. And right now, there is an even match between people aged 60 to 64 and people aged 15 to 19. It's slightly more people entering the workforce than leaving it, but eventually all of these people, these hundreds of millions of people, are going to leave the workforce, and they're only going to be replaced by tens of millions. That is a big concern, and to you can think about this on a societal level of, like, lots of people are retiring and therefore becoming reliant on the labor of people who are still working. You could see it on that level, but you could also see it on this other level of, wait a minute, so on society as a whole, in a world where we need labor, is going to have less labor supporting more people. This is bad, as anyone can see, but I figured, that doesn't sell it enough, so allow me to use this fun little thing that I explain right here, because if you think about it not on a societal level, because again, when you look at societal levels, you can just say, like, okay, well, it's a problem, but what does that really mean? Think about the individual level of the time an individual lives. So when an individual lives 70 years, and in the traditional world, you would work, in the 1960s, let's say, when China had its boom, you work until you're in education till you're like 18 or so, right? So you're in education from there to there, and then you retire somewhere about 60 to 65 till you die age 70. So you're unproductive for this amount of your life, but you're productive for this amount of your life, right? So you have this, like, productive to unproductive ratio. As far as the economy is concerned, again, we're caring about the economy here because the economy is how everything works. I know some people say I don't care about the economy. That's great, but this is what the economy sees of you. You are productive for about double as long as you're not. Your productive periods can pay for other people to have their time where they learn in school and have no value to the world, and their time where they retire because their bodies are so broken that they have no value to the world besides to watch TV and complain about things kids are doing these days. So that is the basic idea behind how the world used to work. However, if we take this exact same graph and we look at the modern era where people live past 70, and in fact, what is the current Chinese age again? It is 77.1. It's getting closer and closer towards 80, right? Just that small difference alone, plus the fact that education is seen as more and more important, people can spend up to like 25 years in the schooling system, and then people retire at 65, and they're, oh, sorry, this is the wrong color. People spend 25 years in the schooling system to get like a grad and a post-grad and a master's, and I don't even know the full system, and then you also retire at 65, and then you're useless for potentially 20 years at that point. You're not meant to have a long retirement. You're meant to have some money that tides you over till you die,
just prevent you dying too irrationally early. But now you have these huge dead periods surrounded by one of these periods in the middle. So you've now got a dependency ratio of like 50-50, like half your life you work, but the other half you prepare to work or you recover from the work. That is a huge difference, as I'm sure you can see just looking at them side by side. And therefore, if you look at these two graphs and you add that to the fact that, like, yeah, the dependency ratio was already increasing in China. So this is a BBC article. They basically just explain the one big issue that actually is happening is the age dependency ratio. Children and retired people to the working age population has risen from 37% to 44%. It's partially because the individual is going longer, but it's also partially because there's all of this stuff happening and there are no children being had. There are, I should say, there are children being had on a statistical level. 60 million people is a lot on a non-statistical level. There are more people aged 0 to like 5 in China than there are people in the UK. That is a man, that is a crazy fact, huh? So, like that is nuts when you say how many people there are. But on a statistical level, having 60 million people be born in the last 5 years is terrifying when 120 million people are about to leave the workforce in the next 5 years. So you can see that they've got this problem of people are retiring and becoming dependent, becoming, again, useless to the economy because, wow, we serve the economy like it's a god. It's a whole problem. I get, you might have that whole problem with the world, but they're useless to the economy for longer and longer, and they're not being replaced by people who are productive. These people are not coming in there, and that is a bit of a problem, a bit of a cause for concern, you might say. And so there's two easy ways you could fix this. One easy way is to, I guess there's three easy ways. One is you increase the retirement age, which is going really well for France right now. I was looking into this, and apparently a man lost his testicle because of the protest yesterday. That's a funny just headline story. But France is just trying to increase retirement age from 62 to 64. Think about that. They're saying, okay, if you're going to live 80-year lives, we want you to work for 44 years, not 42 of them. And people are going, how dare you? What do you mean? There are giant unions saying, what do you mean we should work longer? You don't get to decide how long we work for, which, to be fair, is not what anyone's actually saying. They're always just saying, we raise the retirement age when we will support you to not work. There is this kind of problem that the world has of, we won't let old people die. I mean... whether that's a problem or not maybe depends on how callous you are, but we like if someone stops working, we assume it is our problem to look after them. It wouldn't matter if you were unproductive the economy for huge stretches if you could look after yourself in some way using factors that weren't your own labor. But most people, there's four factors of what actually make economic output, and one of the most important ones still is labor. If we remove the need for labor, or if people can remove their own need for labor, what does it matter what the government says the retirement age is? Just stop working. But the problem is, you need your money from your pension, which comes from the government. And so they're saying, we won't support, you can do what you want. We're just not going to support you until 64. But again, it causes a big, France is always protesting about something. So maybe we can't say that this is a real valid thing. Like, okay, it sucks. But like other countries, like Germany is on 67, Spain's at 65, the UK's at 66. Other countries are having to create this same thing of like, yeah, we don't know how we're going to exist in a world where there are fewer and fewer children being had without raising the retirement age. So the easiest way to fix that, have more children. Second easiest way to fix it is you change the age at which you retire. Like if if the old life expectancy looked like this, you can't make the new graph look like this. You've got to do something more like this. You've got to say, okay, if you're in school for another 5 years, you're working for another 5 years. Also, if you're going to live for an extra 10 years, you're going to work for an extra 3 of those or so. And so you've got to retire at 70, 71, let's just say. Let's pick a really out there, outrageous age, and then you've got to work from there to 80. And then you get roughly the same ratio, right? You get your nice 9 years of retirement, you get et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The problem, of course, here being that what if you don't make it to 71? Now you die, isn't it tragic if you die right there and you never get your nice little red period where you get to be nice and useless? What if working longer isn't viable for your job? There are lots of physical jobs where you will start to die if you work and work and work. Like I can make YouTube videos until I'm 81, but can a person who's working laying bricks all day, can they do that till they're 71? Probably not. So the third solution that always comes up is, of course, migrancy, which is the problem with China because they're not having children.
they don't really have an economy that's easily going to be able to shift away from labor yet. They're not that level of wealth, and the world isn't ready to move away from labor as a key part of products yet. Maybe it will be soon. Maybe they'll solve all their problems somewhere in this decline. But the third solution is you get migrants in. However, China has a emigrancy problem more than an immigrant. Like, some people from Korea seem to move to China, some people from the Philippines, some from Brazil. But otherwise, China loses more people than they gain. They lose... Is that 2.2 million people emigrating to Hong Kong? That can't be correct. But, you know, like, they lose people to major countries, because why wouldn't you move... No, even like New Zealand here, you might think, why are Chinese people moving to New Zealand? If you own something in China, you are inexplicably not really... there's this point about capitalism, right? That, like, in a way, you can argue that wealthy people are like, oh, they're the big problem in the world. But ultimately, if you're getting your wealth from a salary, you don't own that money. You only own the money for as long as someone gives it to you. In the same way, China as a whole, if you own property in China, you own that at the whims of your local government officials. You own that at the whims of the local party officials. And so a lot of people, when they get wealthy, they're like, let's take this elsewhere, which, is not good for anything. And basically, it leads to lots and lots of people emigrating to all sorts of places. Apparently France, that's surprising to me. Bangladesh is... It says immigrants on the left, immigrants on the right. It's quite surprising there are Chinese people going to Bangladesh. And it's 86% male. So that's got to be Bangladesh. I don't know what's going on here. But what I do know is that there is a very fascinating... this is very interesting if you look at this map right here. But yeah, there is a very fascinating problem that China has, and are they going to fix it? Honestly, it doesn't really look like it, right? Their births are just going down and down and down and down and down through the floor into the toilet. Their life expectancy is going up, which is a good thing unless you're trying to cultivate a futuristic economy. And ultimately, this might be the nail in the coffin. Every country arrives at some issue where what their economy needs is in stark contrast to what their people need, and sometimes they start burning things. Sometimes they might start to say, hey, do we need this party who love their hammers and sickles so much? And ultimately, when the political needs hit the economic needs, what are you going to do? And the answer is that kind of depends. The answer to what you're going to do kind of depends entirely on how you choose to react. Is the US in the right model, or are they coming to the exact same conclusion of our economy needs this, our politics needs this? I don't know for sure. I'm just saying, if you look at all the rising superpowers in the world, you look at Argentina, ooh, they had some issues you look at Venezuela, ooh, we have all this oil money and we're blowing it for political needs. You look at Japan even, they were gonna be the second superpower after the US, and turns out something nationalistic. Every economy has its problems, and China is now running headfirst into theirs. Can they fix it? It's a good question. I'd like to hear your thoughts down below. But for now, hope you all enjoyed this second channel video. Look, we've got maps in it, so it looks so good. Actually, I'll highlight China. You can't highlight China on a map because it doesn't want to... we can pretend we highlighted China. The second most populous country, being surpassed by India sometime around January 2023. It's finally happened. How can you say sometime around January 2023? Okay, so it probably happened because of that decline. And so, is this good for China? Is this bad for China? I mean, they are one of the foremost... They were one of the most foremost economic powers. Now they're back there. It's not the world's worst thing. It's just their steep incline has maybe shifted to a gradual set of speed bumps. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video. My search history is looking at kebabs in China. As you do. And so if you want to see more videos, then don't. You've got bad choice. And I'll see you next time. Second channel. Don't care. Bye.